actually our carbon footprint can get a little bit bigger over time because we're measuring more. We're getting better at measuring. So Joe, we've talked, and particularly as we've just had just grown as a business through acquisition, our business is much bigger than it was last year. So next year's carbon footprint is probably going to go up. So I've been discussing this with Joe because we really liked these things going down against our plan. Hello, and a warm welcome to today's Technology Boardroom episode, where we're going to discuss something which is certainly very relevant to my role and my work life, and also to our other speakers in their respective roles, and that's the distinction between sustainability and greenwashing. So in this episode, we're going to explore the definition and different types of greenwashing, some of the pitfalls to be avoided, and at the same time, how to capitalise on and sort of share the positives around progress in company sustainability as well. And we're going to look at this from the experience of our respective roles and the perspectives they give us, but being mindful of the fact this is also a challenge that our clients are facing. And so it's something that we're all in together. So we want to sort of share our experience, and because we think that probably this is something that our clients are always also facing. So I'm Anna Worthington, and joining me today are my co-hosts Mel Thomson and Joe Leggett. So let's start with introductions. Mel.
Thanks, Anna. So I'm Mel Thomson. I'm Senior Head of Marketing at Advania in the UK. Been with the business for 2 years and my marketing career has spanned 25 years so far. That's a bit about me.
And Joe?
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe and I am a consultant at Carbonology. So I've been supporting Advania for the last couple of years on the quantification of their carbon footprint and the production of their carbon reduction plan. Just a bit about us. We are a greenhouse gas emissions verifier, and we do also offer consultancy services. So that's just a bit about us and in a nutshell what we do.
Yeah, and I've really enjoyed working with you, Joe, on our carbon footprint and carbon reduction plan as well. I'm Anna Worthington. My role is Sustainability Lead in the UK, Advania UK, and I'm involved in coordinating ESG compliance and reporting and looking at broader ESG initiatives as we look to embed sustainability across the business. Okay, so let's dive into our conversation. I think we should probably start off with some definitions. And I was thinking about greenwashing, and I can't remember the first time where greenwashing probably entered my vocabulary. But I did some Googling on the subject, and I found it was first used all the way back in 1986. Apparently an environmentalist was in a Fiji hotel, and he noticed the sign which we see often in hotels saying, please leave your towels if you don't want them to be washed because it will save the environment. And it was really just a cost-cutting exercise. And he called them out on greenwashing for the first time. So that's where I discovered it had first originated. Things have obviously become a lot more sophisticated over time. And I think we've probably all got an idea in our heads of what greenwashing means, but I thought, Joe, perhaps you could clarify it from your perspective so we can make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, no problem. I've heard that story before about the hotel and the towel situation. And yeah, I've heard about that. Essentially, yeah, I would agree that greenwashing is essentially a really broad spectrum, but in essence, it's when organizations overstate or misinterpret or selectively report efforts to appear more environmentally responsible than they are. So as you said, the term was coined in the 80s, and it covers various areas really in terms of different ways in which companies can misinterpret data or overstate things. So I don't know if you want me to go into different definitions now, or if general intro is what you're looking for.
A couple of them. I think there's green crowding is something I'd heard of before, and a couple of other sort of iterations of greenwashing. It might be interesting just to hear.
Yeah, for sure. So green crowding is essentially the act of different groups of people or companies getting together and setting targets collectively. So that all sounds great at first. You might be able to set some really good, strong targets. However, you might only move as fast as the slowest member of that team. So one company might have really poor progress and organization around their targets. So that would be green crowding. There's also green shifting, where companies tend to blame or put the emphasis on consumers to take action as opposed to focusing on their own initiatives and carbon reduction strategies or other ESG strategies or initiatives. And then there's green rinsing, where companies regularly shift their targets instead of committing to short-term and long-term realistic targets. So this is essentially just shifting the goalposts and avoiding taking action and reporting on your progress. And then there's green labeling, which is using vague or misleading claims instead of providing the evidence behind those claims and that kind of thing. So it's a really broad spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I was wondering, Mel, this is where the difficulty lies really, because in marketing, in your role, you're looking at really presenting companies in the best light. So how do you feel, how has sustainability entered the marketing sphere, or has it changed over time in your career?
Yeah, that's right. So, so as you say, Anna, as a marketing team, you're always keen to be looking for, and you're under pressure really to look for stories to tell about the business that or the brand that you're representing. So, that can be a real challenge in order to, find those stories and present the business or the brand in the best light and celebrate the successes that you're having in sustainability and the progress that you're making, whilst also being really mindful that you don't want to be, putting your heads above the parapet, as it were, and accused of greenwashing, which, because brand reputation is so important. And the idea of a marketing team kind of ruining a business's brand reputation is something that we can often be fearful of as well. So yeah, I think that's a real challenge for marketing teams, and it spans other topics as well, not just sustainability, but it's definitely one that's become increasingly important because it's important to our clients, and businesses need to strive to achieve these carbon reduction goals as well. So we need to make sure we're being really authentic about and honest about what the business is achieving, whilst not overplaying it or being tempted to put too much of a positive spin on things.
And have you seen over your 20-year career, have you seen an increased demand or appetite for sustainability related news from the business?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, during that time, I joined. I started in my marketing career just at the point at which I was in the publishing industry at the time, and it was when scientific journals were moving from print to online. And of course, one of the stories that businesses and publishing businesses were able to tell at that point was that environmental story. And clearly, in hindsight, there was a lot more to it than that. It wasn't just that these publications were going from print to online. There was still print being produced, and actually there was quite a lot of VAT issues, which meant it was very difficult for print to go away. So, there's always been that element there of trying to get balance between what you're saying in terms of environmentally friendliness being a key benefit of something you're doing in a business. And I think it's what I've seen change is over recent years, it's just become increasingly important to be authentic and transparent. And I guess in the age of social media as well, it means that you're much more likely to be called out as a brand and as a business. It's not just the kind of news media that are holding, and governments that are holding businesses to account now. It can be, it can be a consumer. It can be, any sort of person in the general public can kind of go viral with what they might say or expose about a business making false claims in that sense.
So I suppose being aware of that, you become more reticent to actually celebrate the successes of sustainability or like progress that you're making. And I think, is it the term green hushing, Joe, that people are reticent about and concerned about? And I wonder whether you could expand a little bit more on what green hushing is.
Yeah, no worries. Green hushing, sorry, is a fairly new term that I've heard, but essentially it's just the act of staying quiet about your journey in terms of meeting sustainability targets, such as your carbon reduction targets. So essentially it's about staying quiet on those goals, whether you've done well or if you're failing on those targets. And the main reason why companies might stay quiet on their progress is essentially they're fearful of being criticized on either not meeting those targets or being exposed for shortfalls in their methodology and that kind of thing. It's a huge problem because it sounds a bit cliche, but sustainability is a journey for everyone. And if we can actually learn from mistakes that people have made and companies make, then at least we can all learn from that and as long as those mistakes aren't through, disingenuous motives, we can learn from them basically. So that's essentially what it is.
So it's like openness and honesty, isn't it? And I know I always talk about the sustainability journey, and I know it seems hackneyed, but it absolutely is, because it's a journey that we're all on, but no one's ever going to get there. So it's just continuous improvement, and everyone's at different stages on that journey. So I know we always talk about it, but actually it's absolutely the case, isn't it? And the other thing is that we don't act in isolation. Now we're parts of global supply chains. So if we're looking to make our company a more sustainable company, we actually have to look up and down our value chain as well, and bring our suppliers, and make sure that we're using partners in our business who share the same values. So I suppose openness is what we're looking for. Openness is really what should be celebrated the most. And with that comes being honest about things that aren't going as well, or targets that we're not meeting as well as those that we are. I don't know if we've got a few challenges. I mean, at Advania, we can have our roadmap and our sustainability goals, and then we've just made 2 considerable acquisitions, and now we need to make sure that we bring those in as well. And we now have a new picture of our carbon footprint, which is something we're working on. So as businesses grow and change, nothing stays still, does it? Everything's constantly moving, and we have to adapt our objectives and sustainability goals to those as well. So I suppose being open and honest about those challenges and opportunities means that sometimes the plan or the roadmap will change and the goals will change, because the goalposts are constantly moving as well.
Absolutely.
How do you feel that greenwashing could have a negative effect on or impact on your reputation as a business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It can have a really negative effect on your business in terms of customers losing their trust in your brand image, and your suppliers may also lose trust in you as well. So that's the biggest risk, really, and one definitely to be avoided. So a lot of caution is needed.
And we've got, I can remember some from the news, there've been some quite serious legal challenges as well, haven't there, to some really major household names. I don't know if you've come across any of those, Mel, so from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when you're sort of monitoring, PR pitfalls that you want to avoid as a marketing team, there's some very sort of famous ones that people will recall. Whether it's car manufacturers overstating the reductions in fuel emissions that their cars are making, or big plastic polluters, refusing to move away from using plastic in their recycling. And sorry, not in their recycling, but in their manufacturing. Usually claiming that their, plastic is recyclable, but, that kind of avoids the inconvenience of the fact that, a lot of it isn't recycled. So, there are decisions that businesses and brands are continuing to make that are purely commercial decisions often, where they're not always being honest about that. And so it's right that they get called out for that.
Yeah. I was thinking there's a coffee company with those single-use capsules that they have a big recycling program, but actually it's got really limited reach, but they're using that as a big marketing tool. But in fact, in reality, not really being recycled so much. So I suppose I was thinking about this. It's when you've invested heavily in marketing something, but you haven't really committed to the change that will make the genuine impact environmentally. So that's probably one of the pitfalls, is to approach the marketing based on genuine change rather than coming at it from a marketing perspective with a bit of an environmental swing sort of edge to it.
I think
Yeah,
that's good.
sorry.
I think it must be really difficult as well for a marketing team if, it needs to come from the top, doesn't it? That steer and that authenticity and that commitment to sustainability and improving in that sense. Because if a business or a brand is almost putting the pressure on the marketing team to spin out these stories, then it would be very difficult, I think, to kind of push against that. So yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of see case studies of how some of these PR disasters that we've seen on greenwashing, how they've played out and where that pressure's come from. Whereas I would hope that for most businesses, if they are taking sustainability seriously, or they need to kind of make commitments, that they would have, somebody like you, Anna, in a sustainability lead role that is able to kind of help support the marketing team to ensure that, any messaging that's put around what we're doing is fact checked by a subject matter expert. And if there isn't a sustainability lead in-house, then hopefully working with external experts like Joe and Carbonology can help with that as well.
Yeah, that's so true. Executive buy-in or senior leadership buy-in is so important, isn't it, to trickle down through the company, because it doesn't just happen in one department. It's something that is, if it's genuine, it's happening across the business. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so, well, practical tips. Okay, so how can we actually avoid this? All the various forms of greenwashing. So I suppose one of the things is to avoid being vague in language and environmental claims, and sort of be specific, because we have to now be able to back up what we say, or we make sure certainly that we can back up with data. And I suppose that's where you come in, Joe, isn't it? Back up our claims. So if we are audited or we're brought to account on it, we can actually show the background.
Yes, definitely. So, yeah, I completely agree with that. The most important thing to do is to have verifiable data ready to be audited, as you said, at some point down the line. And if you haven't got plans to be audited at present or in the very near future, at least do, your work in alignment with established frameworks like ISO standards, ISO 1406441 for greenhouse gas emissions quantification, or the GHG protocol. So you've got solid frameworks there that can be verified against in the future. And those standards push transparency. So you can't be you can't be accused of greenwashing in those cases, because part of compliance with those standards is that you communicate your data and findings with your stakeholders and customers.
Mm. And sometimes this isn't even a choice, is it? So, for example, if we're for any public public work now in the public sector, you have to have a carbon reduction plan in a specific format. So I think that we are being helped in many ways by statutory requirements to make sure that businesses do have, even if it's not fully verified data, we do have to be able to provide that carbon footprint, and it's publicly available data.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we've been doing with you for the last couple of years, isn't it? We've had lots of work involved in making that carbon reduction plan, which is, like you say, it's all about getting the vendor requirements initially, but it brings up multiple organizations to a really good standard in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions and the categorization of their emission sources and things like that. So it just brings up the standard of that sustainability reporting.
And that's actually helped us, because then I worked with you, Mel, and the marketing department to actually make that a document that we can share with our customers, and they can see exactly where we're at with our carbon footprint, what we're measuring, how many categories we're measuring of Scope 3 emissions, for example. And it's been quite a useful tool, and we've had great feedback from that, haven't we, from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it gives us the confidence in the team to know that it's been written by the experts in the business and outside of the business. So it's verified. It's not just, it's not just non-experts kind of writing this stuff because it sounds good. It is, genuinely based in what we're doing. And then, we can always kind of check in on how we message that, whether it's on social media or in blog articles that we might want to write that link to the sustainability reports. At least we've got people that we can sense check and fact check some of that with, make sure we're not misrepresenting anything.
Yeah, and we've been lucky actually at Advania in many ways, because we're in scope for the EU CSRD reporting, which really takes that transparency up another level in terms of the areas we need to report in, and which areas are material to the business, and where we have an impact on the climate, where the climate has an impact on us, etc. It's meant that it's really kept us honest, if you like, on being able to explain where Advania is on that, and Advania UK is on that roadmap. So that's been really useful, the good and the bad. So we also need to either comply with where we comply with something, or explain if there's an example where we don't meet a standard because it's not material for our business or something. So it means that there's that transparency and comparability across businesses as well. So that's another useful resource that we've been involved with. ISOs are something that, to me, feel a a useful resource, because when you're being able to provide data, if you have a verified standard, then any customer or supplier has confidence in what you're providing because it's been verified. So that feels like a good route for companies to investigate if they're interested in ensuring that they can back up their emissions and other sustainability. I'm just conscious that we're focusing on environmental sustainability here, but of course there are lots of social aspects as well that people also like to share and are part of sustainability. An area we haven't gone down yet, actually, but I'm really interested to explore, and other companies people who are listening may be interested in, is science-based targets. Joe, how do you feel these fit in against ISOs, or how do you feel the mood is around science-based targets and the appetite for them?
Yeah, there's been great uptake in science-based targets, and especially in the last year or so. Yeah, they're really good. They're forcing companies to actually put some serious thought into their carbon reduction targets. So as opposed to just setting a random date for meeting net zero sometime in the next century, companies are really having to put a lot of effort and thought into those pathway trajectories and, which scopes are involved and which emission sources are involved. So, yeah, it's great. And companies are doing it voluntarily. It's not a mandatory standard. So the fact that companies are going for it out of their own will, there may be pressure from suppliers, obviously, but they're not being forced to by paying fees or penalties. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of interest in them, and something I'm definitely speaking to a lot of clients about at the moment. So definitely a good move.
Yeah, I agree, and it's something that if you are involved in science-based targets, obviously takes quite a lot of investment and effort. It's not easy to obtain science-based targets, is it? Joe, if you've seen that with other clients that you work with, so it certainly really feels like it's something to be celebrated for companies that are on that journey or have science-based targets, and that's a really good way of actually backing up your marketing claims around sustainability. Well, and then obviously you've got honesty and transparency we've talked about, but also setting realistic goals, because sometimes people want to set a goal that just sounds great, but that's just a goal, isn't it? So I suppose that's where the science-based targets come in. You set a pathway to those. But what's the downside of being too overambitious? Joe, you've seen companies who've done this, and how they cope then when they can't meet the goals that they've set.
Yeah, I mean, that links into the green shifting phase of greenwashing. So companies, they're set on realistic targets, and then when they realize that they're inevitably going to fail to meet those targets, they then have to shift the goalposts because they think, okay, now we need to do something a bit more achievable. But inadvertently, they've actually ended up greenwashing because they're just shifting the goalposts, but not actually making any real progress. So that's how greenwashing can start in some cases. It starts with good intentions, but it may just be that there hasn't been proper investment into actually doing the target setting in the first place. It's sort of a tick box exercise, and then down the line, you have to shift the goals and you go to that end of greenwashing. So it's something that people end up doing, not necessarily as a goal at first or a disingenuous thing that they're doing, but it just happens.
Yeah, so setting those realistic goals and then making a plan for how to meet those goals, and monitoring against them. So I think it's actually, as part of transparency, it's absolutely fine to not meet your goals, because people need to understand that sometimes, yeah, as you say, the goalposts in businesses evolving are changing. So then you explain why, and I'm not talking about green shifting. I don't want to get confused with that, but just explaining why the goals you've set, maybe you're on that road, and what the mitigating circumstances are, and how you're going to complete moving towards them. And then the other thing that's a sort of practical tip is actually education. So educating customers, educating employees, and all stakeholders really in the business about what we're doing and why we're doing it. This is something that's quite close to my heart, because I feel that actually doing lots of good things in sustainability is great, but if we don't talk about it, if we don't share what we're doing, then it's very much siloed. And I think that's where marketing comes in as well. That's somewhere where we can share what we're doing, the good and the challenges along the way. So that's been a useful. That's something that, education across the board is really useful, not just externally, but also marketing internally and sharing internally what we're doing as part of our sustainability program. Okay, so we've talked about some of the sort of practical tips to avoid greenwashing in its various forms. And if we just think back to actually why that's so important, Mel, perhaps you could just state for us just what it is that is so concerning about greenwashing and why it's to be avoided in such why it's so important to avoid it.
Yeah, of course. So I guess earlier I focused on, it could be damaging to a brand or a business's reputation. And, as a marketing team, that's something that we'd always be, conscious that we wouldn't want to do, of course. But ultimately for the business, the impact of that can be staggering. So, it's not just brand reputation that's damaged if a business is found to have made false claims, for example. There could be legal repercussions, affecting consumer confidence could hugely impact their sort of consumer base and their market share, and therefore, their revenue and profit ultimately. And obviously, any legal repercussions could have financial penalties as well for that business. So yeah, it's not just brand reputation being a kind of fluffy thing. It does, have a genuine impact potentially on commercials of that organisation.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, with the CSRD EU legislation, which is under review at the moment, whether it's going to be slightly downgraded for some time or not, but it's still coming downstream towards us fast, is that actually, for the first time, does hold directors legally liable and accountable for their environmental claims. So it's a very real issue that people will be very, very keen to avoid. Said, when we make lots of investment in ensuring that our data is reliable and that we are making the right steps and monitoring and making changes to reduce our carbon emissions, such as working with Carbonology, for example, or other organizations, it feels to me like that is something really to be celebrated. If we're investing in that and we're investing in making sure that our data is as watertight and well sort of planned as it possibly can be on our route to net zero, for example. I know we're slightly focusing on the environmental side, but that's where a lot of data is focused. That feels like something that we should be really celebrating in marketing terms.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're always keen to get these stories out of our colleagues across the business who are closer to it than we are. So, yeah, we're always open for ideas for news announcements, blog articles, or pieces that we can promote on our social media accounts. So, yeah.
Something I've been discussing with Joe on that front is that as our data gets better and as we maybe incorporate more scope 3, that's the emissions that we have less control over, but actually contribute the majority of the emissions that we have as a business, and most businesses have. Actually, our carbon footprint can get a little bit bigger over time because we're measuring more. We're getting better at measuring. So, Joe, we've talked, and particularly as we've just had just grown as a business through acquisition, our business is much bigger than it was last year. So next year's carbon footprint is probably going to go up. So I've been discussing this with Joe because we really liked these things going down against our plan. And Joe, what are some of the things that we've considered there?
Yeah, it's a great point, and something that I've seen with lots of other clients as well. But yeah, something we can do there is measure the intensity ratios. So measuring your carbon emissions per full-time employee or per £1 million of turnover and that kind of thing. Intensity ratios and metrics like that just allow you to track your carbon emissions in the face of growth. So as you said, Advania have acquired companies in the last couple of years, so the emissions are going to go up. But those intensity ratios allow us to measure the impact of your carbon reduction initiatives, such as I think you've got an EV salary sacrifice scheme. So obviously that's going to have a really good impact on reducing your emissions from your commuting and business travel and things like that. By measuring the emissions per person or per amount of turnover, we can actually measure the impact of those initiatives you've taken. So it's something you can do in the short term, definitely, and in the long term, they're important too. But lots of companies are going to experience a lot of growth after their baseline emissions have been calculated. It's really good to just measure the impact of those initiatives early on, so companies don't lose sort of faith in the journey, basically.
Yeah, and probably to set expectations, I think, as well around the business about what the effect of that is. So as we measure better data, more categories as well, we're actually doing a better job. But by doing a better job, it means that our carbon footprint gets slightly larger. So if you're just looking at absolute numbers, then that extra work that's gone into making that data extra accurate is not necessarily going to result in a reduction. Although over time, as we get a fuller picture of our carbon footprint, then we should start to see a reduction over time. And another area that I found really interesting is working with customers to actually, we've had some customers have come to us to say that they want us to really work with them to help them understand their emissions by understanding our emissions and what proportion of our emissions can be attributed to the work that we do with them. So that's where we've got a really nice example of collaborating with up and down the supply chain. So that collaboration, transparency, it feels like great things to celebrate because it means we're all working together for common cause. So at the end of it, we're all trying to solve a very difficult problem that we're all facing in our everyday lives. So that feels like a positive step to me, to be celebrating collaboration rather than absolute numbers necessarily being the answer. Or finding ways, as you say, Joe, looking at intensity ratios, which absolutely makes sense as a way to measure progress. This has been such a lovely discussion, and we've covered quite a lot, I think, in the course of the session, from the beginnings of greenwashing back in 1986, I think it was, to different types of greenwashing and sort of the value of sustainability to businesses, and how to share success and failure along the way without repercussion, and to be honest about it. And really, it's a journey that transparency is to be celebrated, and it's important that we don't feel frightened to market and share the good news and the good news stories, but that we are conscious of how to back those up. That feels to me a sort of summary of where we've come through this discussion. I don't know if you have any final comments that you'd like to add, Mel.
No, I don't think so. Thanks for hosting.
And Joe?
Thanks, Anna. And thanks, Mel. It's been a great chat. Thanks for having me on.
I've really enjoyed it. It's great to see how all of our roles really sort of the interplay between all of our roles and responsibilities work together as we sort of work to solve the climate issues that we have facing us, and how to work as a business to be more effective.
Good stuff.
Thank you so much for joining the podcast today, and we look forward to seeing you on another episode.